passionate dairy farmer and Pasture Summit member. Welcome to our Pasture Summit video today on farming for profit and the environment. Pasture Summit is organised for farmers by farmers who believe dairy farming can and should be profitable and rewarding, and that our pasture-fed products are the best for both consumer and for the environment. We're here today deep in the South Waikato on a farm that's one of the best presented around, and is a real credit to our hosts, Brett and Ruth. We thank them for hosting us today and giving us a snapshot into how they are succeeding and thriving in an environment that seems never ending with challenges. We're joined here today by three of the best experts in their business: Dr. Ants Roberts from Ravensdown, Warwick Catto from Ballance Agri, and Phillipa Hedley from DairyNZ. None of this is possible without the sponsorship, and today Ravensdown, Ballance Agri and DairyNZ have all thrown their support behind the Pasture Summit. We hope you enjoy the discussion, and we're always open to feedback, which can be emailed to us or directly entered into our Pasture Summit website. Thank you and enjoy the day.
Hi, I'm Mike, one of the Ravensdown team, and we're part of the video Farming for Profit and the Environment, and we have a couple of technologies we'd like to talk about today. So what we can do with urea is we can put a coat around the urea granule, and that coat reduces the losses of nitrogen from that granule, reduces the losses that otherwise would occur to the atmosphere. So if we are losing less to the atmosphere, that's an environmental benefit, and we get a production benefit because there's more nitrogen then available to our soils and our plants. Easy technology, cost-effective technology, immediately available. So that's something we can do straight away. The second thing we think about is to be really precise with your fertiliser. And what do we mean when we say precise? Specifically, we're talking about the right product at the right rate, at the right time, and the right place, sometimes called the 4 R's. So if we can be really precise about that, that means there's less losses to the atmosphere and to the environment and more available for production. So how do we do that? What do we do if we want to be more precise? Well, there's several things and several steps we can take. Firstly, make sure we've got a good amount of soil test information, because that'll help us determine what's needed. And then we can get into Hawkeye, our mapping package, get into Hawkeye, a map of your farm, and choose the areas that you want to put the respective fertilisers. Be very accurate about that. Then we take that plan electronically and send it to our machine that puts the fertiliser on, and that guides the machine. And then we keep a record after the fertiliser's been applied. So there's a couple of technologies that can help in the area of how do I meet my environmental obligations, and importantly so, whilst maintaining profitability. And if you'd like to have a talk to the team, and they'd be delighted to do so, give them a bell on 0800 100 123.
Brett and Ruth Steeghs, farming in Marotiri near Taupo.
Yeah, so we're milking 470 cows, 170 effective hectares. We've got a young family, and we try and prioritise family time around farm time. And we run a pretty low input system focusing on pasture. So our main goal with farming is to, we're trying to build a 100-year company. That's sort of our ambition. And our biggest thing is we still want to be doing what we're doing today in another 10 years. That's with our, still in the shed, still milking. We want our kids to be able to grow up around that and for them to be involved in the farm. And we want to have a system that we're happy doing what we're doing for another 10 years. We're not getting burnt out. So that's really important to us. So one of the main things that's most important to us with our farm is to try and remove as many decisions from the decision-making sort of process and from daily management as we can. And that allows us to really focus a lot more accuracy on the key decisions we do need to make, particularly around sort of pasture management, a lot more focus on that. And that allows us to run a profitable business, which enables us to achieve our goals and equity growth and whatnot going forward.
Keeping it simple makes it easy for us to get away, take the kids to the beach in the summer, and also makes it easy to replicate and repeat year on year.
So as part of sort of building a 100-year company and working towards that as our end goal, as well as making money and running a profitable business, we've also got to focus on the environment and try and do our best there. We currently got parameters we've got to work within, and it's a constant battle to try and reduce our environmental footprint. And we've found that by changing our farm system to and focusing on our profitability and economic benefit, it is having a benefit on our environmental footprint as well.
So the three KPIs that we focus on is pasture harvested, farm working expenses, and operating profit.
So pasture management for us starts this in the autumn, I suppose, and working towards balance state, and then back to starter calving. So we have a average pasture cover requirement of 2,500 at the start of calving, which is 25th of July, which is probably a little bit early for this area, but it gets us a jump on the grass. We have to work back from that to 2,200 1st of June, and then that dictates our milking season and cow condition. We monitor cow condition quite closely throughout the year, and especially through the autumn period from now on, quite strategically. We'll be drying off on cow condition and pasture cover going forward. We monitor our pasture cover through spring, winter and spring with farm walks, and then more important to me is just riding the farm every couple of days, every 2 to 3 days, and monitoring grass growth. Through the spring flush, that's really important, is that it changes so quickly, and your weekly farm walks are too far apart, and it's just inefficient. So that's the key thing for us, is just constantly watching in front of and behind the cows, and the residual is king. You need to be getting that grass cleaned up from that very first round of milking, or through the winter, and then your first round of milking, and every round thereafter, because once you lose it, it's impossible to get back that quality. So one of the key requirements to having a high pasture harvested number is growing lots of pasture. And the key part of growing lots of pasture is fertility. So we monitor our fertility regularly, and we have been using nitrogen throughout the season for the past few years. We've been slowly pulling our nitrogen use back, and we've been supplementing that with a bit more K, and also a bit more accuracy around timing. So sort of around weather windows and growth. And also our application rates, we brought our application rates back to 25, 30 units of N an application, and just sort of that little and often. And if there's no rain in the next sort of few days on the horizon, then no nitrogen goes on basically. So we try and always maximise our uptake. Even with coated products, there's always still losses. So we just try and reduce that risk as much as we can and get our best bang for our buck. So it's really important for us in this area to get as many days in milk as we can before Christmas. We historically have a dry period through the summer at some time, February, March. The last 2 years we've had quite a dry February, March, which can be challenging. So it's important to get as much milk in the vat as we can leading up to that. So we try and calve as early as we can and as early as we sort of dare, because you've obviously always got that pinch in the spring. We use tools to try and grow as much grass as we can while we're growing, leading up to Christmas. We use nitrogen and fertiliser to increase our grass growth, and then we've got to be very disciplined around managing that. It's very hard managing a surplus. It's a lot easier to manage a deficit. So we do cut a lot of supplement feed and silage, and we use that then through the summer to keep us milking until the grass starts growing again in the autumn. And it's just not quite nice sleeping at night when you've got that stack of silage sitting there, so you know when that pinch comes, you've got a bit of feed in the bank. Economically, it might not be the best option, but it certainly suits our philosophy and just fits with our system here quite well. So round length is a really important tool we use to manage our pasture management. We start with quite a long round. Plan started calving, we'll be on 100 plus days, 120 days. And the fastest we'll get up to is 21 days. We don't really go over that or under that at balance state. And then we'll manage by taking area in and out of the platform for silage and things like that. We'll manage our round length just to maintain around that 21 days. And then at Christmas we start pushing our round out, which can be tricky because often around Christmas we actually have a lot of grass. So it's a bit of a fine line, but you always know there's that pinch coming. So we try and build covers. And through the summer we'll push our round out to sort of 50 days. And then through the autumn, we might speed up a little bit, but then you start using your autumn feed planner and you'll start slowing your round down again, effectively just the reverse of the spring rotation planner. And we'll just start slowing down according to our winter growth targets and average pasture cover targets. So one of our summer management tools we've used for the last couple of years is deferred grazing of pasture. We don't do any summer cropping now. So we just shut up a surplus of grass around the Christmas, January period. This year we've done about 20 hectares, and we then use that to feed the cows as a bit of a top up through the summer. What we found is that it's cheap feed, doesn't cost you anything if you don't need it. It hasn't cost you any money, and you generally always do end up needing it. And one of the biggest benefits we've found is the regrassing effect. Those paddocks are then cranking. It's amazing how they bounce back. So we grazed our first one at the start of February. We're now at the end of March, and we've had our one sort of big grazing off it and two grazings in the round with that paddock. So they're back in the round and they're doing their thing now, which helps us on our autumn round length. We've got all those paddocks back in grass, being productive and not sitting in dirt.
Yeah, clover is extremely important in our pasture-based system, and we've increased our K application, which has helped grow more clover, and with a longer round length, it's also helped reduce the competition.
Yeah, we were involved in a bit of a trial here with the use of K and all fertilisers, to be fair, and we saw a big response in K and S, in not just clover, but the pasture score of those plots was a lot higher, and it's definitely we've grown more clover now in our paddocks than we ever have.
Yeah, because typically these pumice soils are very infertile.
So the main thing with harvesting pasture on a dairy farm is using cows. So obviously to do that you need cows and calf, so your reproduction becomes really important. We try and have quite a tight calving period. We generally have generally have half our cows calved by the 7th of August, and we're looking for a 6-week in calf rate between 75 to 80% without any intervention.
We run Kiwi Cross cows that are generally smaller framed. We aim for like the Hilux of cows rather than a Ferrari. We want them to last. And as they have to climb hills and harvest the grass for us.
Yeah, it's really important to have a cow that's here for a long time. We don't want a cow that's only going to do 1 or 2 seasons and be empty or you have to be covered for other reasons. The higher replacement rate we have to run adds a lot of cost to our system, and also environmentally it's a lot of emissions as well. So we're trying to have a cow that might not be the top producer, in huge production numbers, but she's there every year. She gets in calf early, she eats lots of grass, and she climbs the hills and does her job. Yeah. And if we can get a herd of them, we'll be pretty happy. So we have some pretty strict guidelines we use around supplement, particularly imported supplement, and we try and not use any if we can. So we'll use tools such as once a day to decrease cow demand, and particularly around body condition if they get a bit light. And then in the summer, autumn, we'll cull early. This year all our culls were down to our winter numbers by the end of February, and just reduces that demand on the farm. And if we've done everything else and we're in a bit of we still are a bit short, then we will look to import some supplement. So this year we've fed about 55 tonne of imported supplement, and that's just got us through that dry period, bridged a bit of a gap. The rain's come, the grass is growing, we're away now, so we're not using it to extend our lactation, we're just using it to bridge our lactation when we sort of had no other options. We'd done everything else we could. People sort of say you can't fully feed a cow on grass. I'd certainly challenge that. I think you can. You've just got to train your cows a bit. And body condition and cow condition for us is really important. We don't like having light cows, so we certainly do everything we can and manage that throughout the season very closely. But it's just about having good quality grass in front of them through that spring period. There's always going to be a natural drop in cow condition after calving, and then it's getting that feed in front of them, so once they calve, that feed demand's coming up and that pasture quality's there, so you don't need to be putting in that imported supplement through that period. And we've found since we've removed supplement from our system, especially through the spring period, we are getting a lot better residual and a lot better pasture utilisation. We thought in the past our residuals were pretty good and our utilisation was really good, but looking back now, we were definitely substituting a lot with imported supplement. You don't see it at the time, but we were a lot more aware of it now that there's always a bit more in the paddock for them to go and get than you think there is. So we sort of looked to change our farm system be 3 seasons ago now. There's a combination of factors at the time. We just bought the farm, so we had sort of full control and full ownership over our decisions. We could see our costs were starting to climb, especially with inflation. So we wanted to try and have a bit more control over our inputs and reduce that exposure. We went to a discussion group, a DairyNZ discussion group, down the road with a very low input, pasture-based, pasture-only system. And the financial numbers are pretty impressive, and they're all there for you to see, so you kind of can't turn your head away from that. And I remember there was a question asked of that group. Everyone was asking the farmer, why don't you put more feed in and increase your production and do this and do that? And he turned around and said, well, let me ask you, I've shown you a system that's simple and easy and it's very profitable. Why don't you do my way? And I thought that was a really good question. It got me thinking, and you sort of, you think, well, why don't we? Why do we need to be putting in all this extra feed? It's a lot more work and for very little extra return or no extra return. I was involved in a Teletalk program through DairyNZ and heard a couple of presentations with that. John Roach was one of them with his presentation. And the numbers are just pretty overwhelming, and the statistics around profit per hectare and into imported feed and work on averages, obviously. But like I've heard Mark Neal say, there's not too many guys put their hand up and say they're an average driver. But we could just see that there was a constant climb in our costs, and our profit was squeezing. And a lot of the stuff they talk about in those presentations around the extra 50 cents for every dollar of imported supplement and things like that, we could see that creeping in. We could see that our palm kernel bin was going to need replacing, and we were going to put a new roof on it, and the feed-out wagon was going to get worn out quicker, and stock rent was going to be higher going forward environmentally. That was going to have its challenges and limitations. And we just felt that we were doing a lot of extra work, a lot of extra stress, a lot of extra decisions to make. And the more decisions we have to make, the more chance of getting one wrong, and the less accurate they are. And the harder it is for staff to be able to leave the farm and leave staff in charge if they've got to make decisions or have a complicated day, lots of different things to do in the day. It's pretty easy to say, put the cows in the paddock and milk them. But you've got to obviously train the staff around pasture management as well and residual management. But it's just one thing rather than sort of everything else as well.
So effectively, our old system wasn't aligning with our goals of being able to get away, where our current system does, and it's churning out more profit.
So I think the most important thing farmers can do right now to focus on the bottom line, profit, and also the environment going forward is to just put less emphasis on production. Ignore your production. Your production's a byproduct of everything else you do. Focus on your pasture harvested, work out where you are, and then work to improve on that and effectively ignore your production.
Hi everyone, my name is Katie Aikenhead and I'm a member of the Science Extension team with Ballance Agri Nutrients. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Pasture Summit Group for allowing Ballance the opportunity to sponsor this summit and also contribute to this video. New Zealand has a reputation of pasture-fed production. To continue to produce sustainably and profitably, we need to look after our soils. Soils are more than just dirt. They are the basis of whole ecosystems. We need to balance the chemistry of our soils with the biology in them and also the physical structure of our soils. When these all match together, we have healthy soils. As a farmer-owned cooperative, our nutrient specialists have the tools to help farmers understand their farming businesses, to grow their farming businesses through understanding of farm systems, and also to understand the economic and environmental impacts these have. We have tools such as Mitigator, SureFos, My Pasture Planner, and SpreadSmart that have been developed in conjunction with MPI to help farmers through these. At Ballance, it's all about working with nature to enable growth for generations to come.
As New Zealanders, we're passionate about our place and our people. Our rich natural environment has allowed us to grow a reputation that's the envy of the world. We all need to do our bit to care for and protect our unique country. And if we nurture it, we'll keep it thriving for generations to come. By working with nature, understanding her at a deep level, we can farm and grow sustainably and productively. We call it balance with nature. And it all begins in the soil, the goodness of everything we farm and grow, our whenua. As we learn and grow together, we'll be right beside you every step of the way, with sustainable products, tools, and expert advice, so we can continue to provide the best quality food to New Zealand and the world. We all have a part to play, because the best results always come from working together with nature.
At Warwick, we've heard of how Ruth and Brett's farm system's really focused on pasture harvest. I'd just be interested in your comments about how they can maximise their pasture growing for that system.
Yeah, well, the pasture grows in soil, and so management of the soil from both its chemical aspects, i.e. the nutrients that plants require, the physical aspects of soil, the ability for gases to go in and out of the soil, for water to drain through the soil, and also the biological aspects of the soil are all important components of leading to good pasture production and quality. And so it's not just about nutrients, it's about managing the total soil ecosystem.
And what you heard from Ruth was she talked about the importance of the legume to the farm system, and she addressed the issue of potassium. So the conversation is not just about nitrogen, it's about all the suite of nutrients. And so the PKS, the phosphate, potassium and sulphur are your cheapest source of feed, and they're focusing on that.
So on Brett and Ruth farm, we're in what's called the volcanic plateau, and the soils are pumice soils, a type of volcanic material. Typically in their unimproved state, i.e. their unfarmed state, they have a reasonable pH. They have low phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, magnesium and calcium status for growing good grass legume pastures. And that's true to a large degree on any soil in New Zealand, from its virgin state to trying to get to an agricultural state where we can support at maximum clover growth to produce to fix the nitrogen from the air to basically feed the grass component of the sward.
And Brett and Ruth showed you the soil test results they've recently got. How are they sort of stacking up for what they need to do to maximise the pasture growing?
Yeah, they've obviously spent a bit of time and effort and money to build up the soil fertility levels. The pH levels were all in the optimum. The phosphorus levels were actually, so they had done a whole farm test, which I encourage many dairy farmers to do every 5 years or so. Test every paddock to see how that stacks up against the other paddocks, and you can fine tune your fertiliser program accordingly. But basically, from my quick look at the soil tests, Brett and Ruth can afford to put on less P fertiliser for the next 2 or 3 years and monitor that change. They have done well with getting the K and S, the potassium and sulphur levels up, but on these soils, under high rainfall, the K and S is quite mobile, so you can lose it quite quickly. So they need to keep on top of that, which they're doing well. So and they add magnesium as well. Pumice soils are about the only soils in New Zealand which are magnesium deficient for good pasture production. So they've done a very good job with their major nutrients. Don't forget trace elements. There are different soils throughout New Zealand which have different trace element requirements. We do know what healthy pasture, what the content of healthy pasture should be. We do not soil test for trace elements because they're not calibrated to pasture production or animal performance. We would prefer to test the herbage.
Okay, so we've heard the base fertility's pretty good here. So once you've got your base pasture production supply curve set out, the next issue is how can you manipulate it with nitrogen? And so what they do is they focus on a couple of things. One is they know what their feed supply situation is. They feed budget regularly, and therefore they know what a deficit or surplus might look like. And the critical tool is nitrogen as a growth accelerator. If you've got growth, you put nitrogen on it, increases that. So they have a pretty fundamental focus. You heard Brett talking about setting up the season early in the spring. Nitrogen's fundamental around, and their emphasis on pre-Christmas nitrogen in terms of getting the system set up. Post-Christmas, it's really post that dry period that they experience here is bringing nitrogen to set them up for the autumn. But the key thing is it's designed where he has feed targets in mind. And you heard him refer to his spring targets and his 1st of June targets. He's using nitrogen in a way to manipulate the feed supply, and that's how he gets his best economic performance out of that.
Yeah, well, just one question I'd have for you, Warwick, on that one. Is there opportunity for him to pull his nitrogen back further with now that he's putting quite a lot of effort on growing more clover? Or for this farm system, do you think that number of sort of 3 to 4 applications before Christmas and one in the autumn is where it's at for this farm system? Yeah,
well, so what I would say is, and you'll see in the pictures, it's a rolling landscape. There's always variability, and the opportunity wherever you go, even on farms that look flat, there's spatial variability within that. So the opportunity will be to identify which parts of the farm are higher or lower in soil nitrogen status and put the nitrogen into the most responsive parts of the property. So that's the simplest one. And the other one is make sure you calibrate your fertiliser spreader. So you might be bringing in the quantity you want on the farm, but are you applying it uniformly and the rate you want to? So 2 really simple things that people could focus on would give them good improvements.
Yeah, Ants, just wanted to ask you, for this farm system doing around 950 milk solids per hectare, is there an optimum range for nitrogen fertiliser you would suggest for an annual application?
Yeah, well, I believe that you could usefully use 100 to 150 kilograms of N per hectare on a farm like this, producing the amount of pasture that they're producing with the milk solids that they're producing. And that's mostly to help you I talk about tactical nitrogen use rather than strategic, to as a short-term tactic to fill in known feed deficits because they are feed budgeting, they are measuring pasture growth, etc. So they'll know where their deficits are occurring. They can plan their nitrogen applications to time the pasture response into those periods of deficit. And that's usually on the shoulders of the season, late winter, early spring and autumn.
Yeah, Warwick, just was interested in your comments about different forms of nitrogen fertiliser they might be able to do and rates during the season, pre and post Christmas.
So Brett talked about his round length being around getting down to 21 days. And one of the things to remember with nitrogen, with your rate, is the most efficient nitrogen is the nitrogen that's converted into a dry matter response. And so with really quick rounds like that, you're looking at a kilo and kilo and a half of nitrogen per grazing day length. So looking at rates around that 20 to 30 mark are where you get the optimal conversion of nitrogen to pasture response. If you're going towards the 50 rate, you want long spelling periods to do that. In terms of the forms of nitrogen, effectively urea is the predominant nitrogen used in our New Zealand systems. It's a product that's vulnerable to ammonia loss. Now Brett manages that. He talks about he times it with rainfall, so there's adequate moisture. You can do that, or there are other products that have a urease inhibitor which reduces the volatilisation of nitrogen going off. So there's a range of tools. We like to talk about the 4 R's: right product, right rate, right time, right place, and he's really focused on that and doing it well.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about N fertiliser here, but is N fertiliser the driver of leaching for this farm? Or
in grazed pastures, no. It is a component of the total N pool, some of which then gets lost by leaching. So any input, whether it be supplementary feed, grain, any input that contains protein goes through the animal, and a lot of that protein surplus to the requirements for either production or body maintenance ends up in the urine of the animal, and so it's the urinary N which drives N leaching in grazed farm systems. Now that N could come from clover, could come from fertiliser N, could come from supplementary feed, as I've said. So the major loss is a system loss. You heard Warwick say before the 4 principles, the 4 R's around fertiliser management. If you follow the 4 R's, the right rate, the right form, the right time, in the right place, then research has shown if you're following those principles, then the actual direct loss of nitrogen from an application of fertiliser onto a paddock will be less than 10% of the total being lost from that paddock because of urine spots and other factors.
yeah, so for this farm here, they're purchased N surplus of the N coming into the system, which is largely N fertiliser with a bit of N in supplement. Their product is 105 kgs of N. Where does that sit relative to other farms in this Waikato region?
I think the key thing to focus on is not necessarily the number, but the trend and what levers you can pull, because a lot of that is of the N surplus dynamics or the overseer numbers or whatever tool you use. It's associated with your system and what are the levers you want to do. So supplementary feed, so if nitrogen comes in PKE or it comes in urea bag or some other form, it's all equivalent. So untangle that system and look at where the flows are going, and that's where those tools, you should see them in that light as a way to quantify what's in your system and which levers can we pull.
Yep, so you could have a nitrogen surplus for another farm of 105 with only 50 kgs of that coming from N fertiliser. It would still have the same effect on the environment if all that N came in from supplement.
That's
Correct.
right.
Yep.
Correct.
So Phillipa, you've seen the farm, we've talked a wee bit about it. How replicable is this model in other regions? How typical is it on what you see in other parts of the country?
Yeah, so from an operational point of view, how replicable it is, I think that's been explained by Brett and Ruth. It's a simple system, that they haven't got many decisions, that they can go away and leave their staff. So this system here with not a lot of inputs coming in, not a lot of decisions, makes it a very repeatable system. From the point of view of the environment, looking at the system relative to other parts of the country. The N surplus here is at the lower end because they're not bringing a lot of inputs in and their nitrogen use is moderate. So from an N input point of view, the farm's looking in a good position. But the second thing is really around this greenhouse gases, and greenhouse gas being, I'll talk about methane being driven by dry matter intake, being again a largely pasture-based system. There isn't a lot of inputs coming in, so therefore on a greenhouse gas basis, this farm is looking in a very strong position relative to other farms around the country who might be bringing a lot more imported feed and have both a higher N surplus and a much higher dry matter intake per hectare, not just from pasture, but from the other supplements they're bringing into the system.
So it's the same levers that are driving nitrogen leaching that are driving methane. It's feed ingested and your ability to convert it into end product and milk that's really important. The other question I had for you is the transition they made, Brett and Ruth made, to this system from a higher input system. What do you think the biggest issue is to make that transition?
The transition they made was really made on their decision to focus on grazing management. And I had it asked recently, have farm systems changed? And my answer to that is the principles of running a farm system haven't changed, but what has changed over time has been the attitude and focus on grazing management. And I think we've lost that core principle of growing as much as you can, and eating as much as you can and using the cow to do that. So the transition here wasn't difficult for the cows or the staff. The transition was dependent on Brett and Ruth's attitude to focusing on grazing management, making it a priority and doing a great job and taking their focus off production.
Hello from the South Island. I'm Alistair, Rayne, dairy farming in Darfield, and with me is Greg Roadley, who's dairy farming near Ashburton. Some of you will have been at Greg's during the spring event in 2019. We held a very successful field day on Greg's farm, and that's available online on the Pasture Summit website if you want to refer back and get some more detail on how Greg runs his operation. So Greg, if we could start, if you could perhaps just describe what your goals are for your farm and about your farm system, how you managed to drive both a very profitable business and a business with a low environmental footprint.
Yeah, so Rachel and my goal is really just to run a simple, profitable, repeatable farming system. Something that's simple enough to articulate to all our team members, something that is profitable at a wide range of milk prices, and sustainable systems, which are sustainable around resources and outputs, be they environmental or financial. So that's our objective. We'd like to run a system that can be replicated to a high degree of accuracy across a wide number of units. That really drives a simple system and a low-cost pasture-based dairy production system.
So, Greg, could you just explain to us a little bit about how you set up for the autumn in order to achieve your goals on your farm?
Yep. So our farm system is solely grass-based. So everything we do is around optimising pasture harvesting. It's a key driver for our business, and autumn management plays an important role in that. So we use a lot of the simple tools that are available around rotation planners, target round lengths at set times of autumn, and target pasture cover. So to manage the autumn, to minimise nutrient loss and maximise profitable milk production, we drive a high pasture cover in late summer and a glide slope down to a dry off of 2,000 kilograms of dry matter a hectare late May, early June.
Okay. How do supplements feature into how do you manage the supply and demand so you actually have feed in the autumn? How do you work that?
Yep, so we don't typically feed supplement. We don't bring any feed into the platform. We conserve some silage on farm that's used in emergency situations, I guess. Primarily we drive autumn pasture cover through strategic use of nitrogen and early culling. So we manage by reducing demand rather than trying to increase supply in the autumn. We will use some baleage conserved on farm to fill a specific feed deficit if required, but typically we have a glide slope of grass only through autumn to dry off.
Okay. Can you describe how, I guess we consider nitrogen as a form of supplement, what's your plan for nitrogen in the autumn period? How do you, what does that look like?
Sure. Hey, well, our farming philosophy is really to try and double every dollar we spend. So that's what we need to do to drive a low cost milk production. So we really view nitrogen as a form of imported feed. So we will only use it very strategically when pasture has the highest value. So that's in both shoulders of the season. So our nitrogen use curve would look like a stronger weighting for early spring, low rates when we know we're going to have surplus feed during the later spring and summer period, and then late summer we lift the rate of N strategically to try and push a bank of feed in front of us in autumn. So that's how we principally manage our 190 kg cap, identifying that it's an imported feed and use it when it has the very highest value, which is in situations where your normal grass curve is lower. At a high level, a description of our farming system, we're operating fully irrigated Canterbury land with a range of irrigation systems, a combination of pivot and travelling irrigators, applying 190 kgs of N on an annual basis. We harvest around 17.5 tonnes of dry matter per hectare, so we grow a little bit more than that, and operating farms with a stocking rate around 3.6 to 3.7 cows a hectare, with a calving date 1st of August and a dry off date late May.
Greg, you would have been, I guess, some years back you'd have been closer to 250 kilograms of any hectare a year, and now we're having to be no more than 190 on any hectare. What's been the journey for you to get back down from 250 to 190 where you are now? What steps did you take?
Sure. We've had a philosophy of I guess trying to innovate to beat inflation. So our objective is to drive a farm working expense sub $3.50. So we've been continually assessing all levels of input, be it nutrients or irrigation or the full range of farm inputs, and been looking for ways to do the same amount of production with a little bit less input. So it's been a bit of a sinking lid approach, and so specifically thinking about nitrogen, that's been achieved by continuing to improve how we harvest pasture. So just trying every year to do a better job of that. So better residual management, better consistency of grazing. So all the best practice things there, in combination with being really strategic around its use. So really being clear about the value proposition of N rather than something that's continually in the system. So it's been a process of not focusing on total production, but focusing on productivity. So always trying to produce the same with a little bit less input rather than trying to produce more all the time. So it's been a gradual sort of process of small incremental improvements. And some of the other things we think about doing to reduce our N loss are around manipulating pasture cover. So the way we set the farm up in autumn from now on drives our spring feed budget. So we strategically take a slightly higher cover through winter and into autumn, so we have more pasture available for cows, which reduces the requirement of either imported feed or pushing harder earlier with nitrogen when the response is lower and there's more risk of leaching. So we're pretty disciplined around soil temperature drivers and soil moisture when we make decisions about N application in spring and through summer. One of the other things we do is try and avoid applying nitrogen when we know we're heading into or in surplus situations. So the return on applying nitrogen to create surplus silage or baleage is very low, so we will reduce our N loss during periods of known surplus. And then at a paddock by paddock basis, we'll avoid applying nitrogen around any areas of known high fertility levels, be that around stock camp areas, tree lines, near tracks, water troughs. So at a paddock by paddock basis, we exclude areas to reduce our end use.